Hello guys, today we are going to learn and practice a popular way for retouching portrait. We call this method frequency separation. It was first created in 2006 and getting more and more popular these days. Very good outcome, lots of control, and most important, very easy to use after you realize what frequency really means in still image. So without any further ado, let's get started. To retouch a photo by using this method, the very first step is to separate high frequency and low frequency from an image. And that brings us two questions. What are those frequencies? And why shall we do that? Well, frequency is a word we use to describe how things frequently change. If it changes a lot in the same amount of time, then we call this high frequency. If it changed not quite often, then we call this low frequency. But in a still image, what are those changes? The color is changing from place to place. The texture change as well. I think everyone here agree that there are no two spots which are exactly the same in an image. So that means changes did happen even in a still image. So now we are going to find out what high frequency and low frequency are in an image. If something changes frequently, then that is a high frequency. So what are those? Texture on human skin. We can find pimples and freckles here and there. Textures changes rapidly in a still image. So that texture, including pimples and freckles, are the high frequency in portrait image. On the other hand, there are things don't change too frequently. Colors and brightness. Well, of course, there are brighter area and darker area. But overall, they change smoothly and gradually. If we pick two neighbor spots side by side, you will find there is no huge difference in color and brightness. So color and brightness are the low frequency in still image. After we realize what high and low frequency are, we have a good idea on how to retouch portrait. If we separate this frequency into two different layers, the high frequency layer contains all the texture, and the low frequency layer only contains color and brightness. So when we use clone stamp or healing brush on blemishes, which is on high frequency layer, that area will remain the natural color and brightness, because color and brightness are stored in a different layer. And when we further smoothen the skin tone, those textures will remain as well. So our outcome looks more like a human, not a doll. So technically, frequency separation retouch is really easy to use. Step number 1. Separate high and low frequency. Step number 2. Use all the tools you have already familiar with. Fix everything you don't like on an image. Let me show you an example here. See how this technique works in Photoshop. Look at this image. We want to keep the original background, so press Ctrl or Command J twice. Now we have two copies of the background. Why two copies? Because we want to use them as high frequency layer and low frequency layer. Now let's do step number 1. Separate those high and low frequency. All we have to do is to create a low frequency layer, and after we deduct that low frequency layer from the original image, we will receive a layer only contains high frequency. To get a low frequency layer, the easiest way is to remove all the textures in the image. How to remove texture? Gaussian blur. Select the first copy. We use the lower one as low frequency layer, then go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur. As the texture getting blurry, that means the high frequency info has been removed. But the trick part is, that radius here indicate how blurry we want. Which radius shall we select? We know this layer is a low frequency layer, and we will perform a deduction, a subtraction on this layer to create a high frequency layer. The point is, if our low frequency layer is extremely blurry, this low frequency layer has no texture at all. Zero high frequency here. So when we deduct this layer from the original image, the high frequency layer will contain all the texture. So when we smoothen the skin tone on low frequency layer, textures won't be affected at all. And what if we only blur this low frequency layer a little? There will be quite a lot of textures remain. That means there are still quite a lot high frequency remain in this layer. So when we do anything on skin tone, those textures, those high frequency, will also be affected. Our final result looks really unrealistic. So the conclusion is, the greater you blur the low frequency layer, the more natural result you will get, and vice versa. After we select our radius, we can rename it low frequency. Now we are going to do the deduction. Make sure you select the top layer. Select image. Apply image. What we want is to deduct the low frequency layer from the current layer. So let's change the blend mode to subtract. Then choose low frequency layer. And here's something important. For any 8-bit image, set the opacity to 100%, scale 2, offset 128. We all know what opacity means. Scale here basically means how much you want the subtraction to be done. It can be set between 1 and 2. We want the most of it, so we set it to 2. Offset is set to 128, because that's what gray is in 8-bit image. Make sure all the settings is correct, then press OK. Then change the blend mode to linear light. Step number 1 completed. We have 2 independent layers here. Low frequency layer mainly contains color and tone info. High frequency layer contains all the texture. The final step is to retouch and fix everything you don't like. Let's say you want to further even and smoother the skin tone. Just use a lasso tool. Select a large area. Then use Gaussian blur to make skin tone smoother. Remember there's almost no skin texture here, so the Gaussian blur will only affect color and brightness. Or you can use a mixer brush for detail retouch. Press and hold the brush icon. Choose mixer brush. Select a saffron brush and toggle this icon off. Don't use it. You can use the default setting here, but I would probably suggest change the flow to 10% whenever you do retouch on someone's face. Not like lasso tool. Mixer brush requires a lot of patience, but really good for fine retouch. You can also use normal brush, but make sure you check your eyedropper tool first. Sample size should be at least 5 by 5. You want an average color, not a pixel. And only sample current layer, because this layer contains all the color info. Then select brush tool. Hold Alt or Option key to select a color you want to use. Then just paint accordingly. If you want to fix some texture, you can either use clone stamp tool or spot healing brush. And again, make sure only sample from the current layer, so the color and brightness will remain the same. I will speed up this process. Usually it will cost you no more than 15 minutes to do all this process. I think the outcome is pretty good. But if you want any further improvements, select solid color, change color to white, then change the blend mode to soft light. Select the mask, then use Ctrl or Command I to reverse the mask to black. A black mask means everything we change on this layer has been hidden. What we are going to do is, using a white brush, paint on any place that should be a little bit brighter. Paint gradually and smoothly. Don't paint on everywhere. Focus on her forehead and cheekbone. This is a little bit ornament you can do on basically every portrait work. Finally, sharpen her eyes and edge a little bit. I think our job is done. Look at the before and after differences. This is how frequency separation works. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you guys enjoy it, and make sure you like and subscribe if you do. I hope to see you soon.